Hello everybody. It is October 15th, 2025 here in the United States of America. I'm making a video pretty early in the day today because I am off of work the rest of the week. So I get to get some things done early in the day as opposed to late in the afternoon when I'm dead tired. So this is much nicer. But what I'd like to talk about this kind of involves the shutdown of the U.S. government over the inability of the Republican and Democratic parties to come to agreements on basically anything because the party platforms are so far apart from one another that I don't see how we can actually effectively govern the country moving forward. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the shutdown. That's not really the point of this video, but the fact that we are at a place where the two main political parties, both vying for control of the country, are so far apart on policy and their visions for the country that they can't really come to terms and agreements on basically anything when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to social policy, tax policy. This is no longer, two people or two parties debating on whether or not certain tax policies are best, or perhaps we should focus more on education, infrastructure, the military. These aren't, I would say, fairly minor policy disagreements. Let's talk about tax rates. What's better for the economy. I mean, those things are still there, but the way they're approaching these issues is so radically different from one another. We're almost talking about two completely different visions for the same civilization. And we've got to the point now where, if, especially at the federal level, when, say, one side wins an election, it's an existential crisis for the other. It's the end of their world, the end of their vision. It's the destruction of everything they hold dear. And we as I hate to say our democracy, because it's not a democracy. The United States is a representative republic. It's a limited democracy, and I think that's really the only kind of viable democracy when you have a nation that's as large as ours. It's good to have a Republican-style government over a direct democracy, but it's hard to have a stable democratic system though when the people living under it can't even come to an agreement, like a shared vision of a civilization. And when you're in these kinds of situations, long term, this leads to eventually some kind of civil conflict. The people running this country are no longer really interested in leading the country and doing things that are for the direct benefit of their citizens, or promoting tax policy that actually benefits families, or public policy that benefits their citizens in general. Really, what this is all about is just pleasing donors, pleasing radical elements in the party. And when I talk about that, I'm speaking more of the Democratic Party. Funny enough, I feel like the Republican Party at this point, especially with the more populist MAGA base really asserting themselves in the party, they're a lot more open-minded to certain policies. I think the Republican Party is not so beholden to like a activist faction within their party as the Democrats are. When it comes to, say, illegal immigration, the Democratic Party, even though they know it's probably best for the safety and security and stability of the country, if they start talking about closing the border, deportations, then the more radical section of their party is up in arms and in open revolt. We have one party now where the platform seems to be, especially amongst like the youth of the party, is a completely wide open border. No social taboos, no neat social categories any longer. Culture is simply consumption. Like, there's no history to be proud of. It's almost like the complete ripping down of a civilization, building something completely brand new, but something so amorphous and ambiguous that I don't see how it would even be able to stand on its own 2 feet. There isn't a preferred language for a country to speak. It's this idea that everyone can come in and just speak whatever they want and use whatever language they want, and it doesn't affect social cohesion, which is absurd. I mean, that seems to be the vision for the Democratic Party when it comes to things like policing. It's like letting violent criminals out on the street because it feels good to let people out of prison, and we're doing the right thing by not feeding into the prison industrial complex, despite the fact that it's actually harming our own citizens. Passing things like cashless bail or defunding the cops, makes us feel better as activists, but it's actually not really beneficial to our own people. That's kind of how one party is attempting to govern the country. The other faction, the Republican Party, has their own issues too, and especially when it comes to foreign policy. I think people are very critical of the fact the Republican Party at this point seems to be, beholden to donors from certain foreign countries to our own detriment. They're not addressing things like with the student loan crisis. They're not really doing anything to address homelessness in any real meaningful way. They're not doing anything to address rising prices of homes and whatnot, and the rising prices of healthcare, and how difficult it actually is to pay for any kind of basic health procedure. They don't really have any concrete solutions to those things, and I don't think the Democrats do either. So you have the majority of this country sort of stuck between two warring factions. I will say the Republican faction is a bit more competent when it comes to governing, but is still far from ideal. They're still letting certain issues fester because the way that those issues would actually need addressed to them would be, I guess, socialism or something like that. I don't know. And this is another problem too when it comes to attempting to govern a country from a strict ideological standpoint. Either you're like a neoliberal activist and you have your criteria for what you want the world to look like, even if implementing it is next to impossible or not feasible, will just cause complete chaos. And then you have the other faction where, well, no, certain issues can't be addressed, especially when half your country is under crushing debt, because doing so would involve the government, and I'm not willing to pay off anyone else's debt, and it's not right to expect a taxpayer to pay for things that they didn't, what have you. So they're leaving all these festering issues just lie and get worse and worse and worse until it becomes such an unmanageable problem that unfortunately radical solutions would be the only thing left available. I mean, you would just have to forgive just massive amounts of debt overnight because so many people are defaulting on it. Talking about student loans, especially with healthcare too. I mean, with housing prices being as high as they are, and continuing to rise, and younger people having a much more difficult time, people that are already burdened by student loans having a much more difficult time getting houses while also being burdened with medical debt. That's a time bomb. That's a ticking time bomb ready to explode. And nobody is addressing that in any kind of sufficient way. I mean, sure, the Democrats have some ideas, and maybe some of their ideas might work, but the rest of their party platform is so utterly destructive that nobody wants to put them in power again. And the Republican Party, even when they're handed a mandate to run the country effectively and govern effectively, they're so hamstrung by, I'm just going to say it, old conservative boomer Fox News ideology that they can't manage these problems either. They can maybe manage some of the problems a bit better and more reasonably, especially when it comes to immigration, and maybe they're a little bit better on foreign policy, especially under Trump's guidance. But even then, none of these issues are actually really being addressed properly, and we're at a point now where the gulf between the two parties is so wide they can't come to basic agreements on anything, and now our government isn't even running at the time because of this. And I don't see how the United States moves forward as a stable republic if this continues. We have to at least have some kind of common vision in regards to what we want the country to look like, or how the country should be run, or the type of economic system we want to live under. We have to have some kind of realistic and common sense way in dealing with our issues. These issues that, if they're left to fester, will just cause more and more chaos, and maybe even rip the country apart. We have to let go of how hamstrung we are by these rigid 19th and 20th century economic and political systems. We have to start thinking outside the box and actually addressing these issues using pragmatism and realism to do so before they spiral out of control. And it's so frustrating as an American citizen to watch these two parties grow further and further apart from one another. And I think what's going to happen, and I made a video about populism before and why it's becoming more popular in the United States, is that more and more people are going to start moving towards the center, so to speak. And what I mean by center is they're going to move towards favoring addressing these issues and not really worrying about how they get addressed or how they get it done, as long as they get it done. I think you have a lot of people on the right that are seeing the danger of unchecked corporate power. You have a lot of people on the left that are finally seeing the dangers of having a wide open border and tearing down the basic framework and scaffolding of a moral society. I think they've seen the experiment of complete moral relativism as a total failure, and it's causing chaos and horror. So you have you have large groups of disaffected people from either party that are starting to come and meet in the middle, where their main concern is actually solving our looming economic issues, like our issues with debt and our issues with our healthcare system. And neither party seems to be addressing any of these issues in any kind of sufficient way. And as I mentioned in a previous video, it's a political time bomb for both parties. Either they really rein themselves in and start addressing these things in a meaningful way, or I think either both parties are going to find themselves without much of a political base left to rely on, or our divisiveness will be exacerbated to the point where the country will rip itself to pieces. Either way, it's not good. It's really not good for anybody. And I really think it's time for real change to happen in this country in regards to the people we choose to lead it. This country needs solid, pragmatic, and realistic leaders that look at our country's issues and actually want to solve them without worrying about pleasing donor classes or activist classes, or worry about opinion polls and catering to constituents. And obviously they should, but what I mean by that is, well, the activist class won't like that we're actually talking about border security. Well, even though we know it's destructive to the country, we have to please them. Okay, for what? Just so you get an elected seat somewhere and not actually do your job? Or in regards to some of the things the Republicans want, I'm sure they look at opinion surveys from, I would say, the older generation of Bush-era conservatives and say, well, we can't go in that direction because they won't like it. Well, if the country's going to rip itself apart, does it really matter? That's kind of where I'm at, and that's what we really need. We need real, pragmatic leadership that is really willing, and this is from both parties, to actually tackle the issues facing this country in a real, meaningful way before things get worse. But anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. I will be back Saturday with another one. Now, the Saturday video is generally about geopolitics, so I'm probably going to talk about the beginnings of this long-term peace deal, hopefully, in Gaza between Israel and the Palestinians. And if it actually will hold, I'll probably talk about that, or maybe touch upon Trump's latest comments in regards to the Russian Federation and the war in Ukraine. But anyways, everyone out there, have a great day, and I will see you then.